How big of a target does big social media have on its back from the likes of Congress, and what will Twitter say about it later on today?
Well, Dom, it's an absolutely huge target. We know that Congress is looking to potentially revoke or reform Section 230, which, as you know, gives social media platforms some immunity for the content that's posted on their sites. But the big challenge for Twitter today ahead of earnings is not just going to be addressing regulatory threats, but threats about whether or not these actions, banning President Trump and some of his allies, actually impact user growth. That's what analysts are going to be wondering today, whether or not user engagement is impacted. We know there have been some surveys that it might not have had as big of an impact that some may have forecasted. But if it does, Dom, that presents a huge threat to Twitter's business.
Do you think, Sarah, that investors are keying very much on that? I mean, just intuitively, as a user of the platform, I think to myself, President Trump back then had millions and millions of users. He was probably one of the biggest catalysts for driving engagement on that platform. You've taken that out of the picture. How exactly then do investors start to handicap the likes of or the prospects for Twitter, knowing that there are a lot fewer people, I guess, engaging the platform in the way that they used to over the last 4 years?
Yeah, well, Twitter is uniquely impacted by this, of course, but I think a lot of media companies and platforms are facing this. What do you do when Donald Trump is no longer driving a crazy news cycle that drove tons of engagement? I think what analysts are going to want to hear is, what's Twitter's plan for tackling and monetizing live events? Twitter has, over the past few years, made itself distinct by becoming the platform that you go to when there's breaking news, when there's a major sports event, etc. But the problem for Twitter is it hasn't been able to turn that engagement into really meaningful revenue. I'm looking for analysts to ask questions about what's your plan to increase average revenue per user, especially during breaking news events, with things like new video ads and potentially even new subscription offerings that'll get those deep dive engaged followers even more engaged on certain topics.
So we've heard some of those reports, and Twitter even confirmed it to The Verge, saying that they're considering or looking at some of these, subscription type offerings that you mentioned there. It seems as though I remember the days of Yahoo, and for some of the younger folks out there, yes, Yahoo was a big thing back when I was growing up in the internet age. When they started charging for things, it kind of signaled a top for them. Do we feel as though social media companies right now, when they start charging active daily users fees, that this could be something that is perhaps a top for some of these companies? The advertising model is seemingly what signals health in some of these companies.
Sure, Dom, and advertising is going to continue to float these companies for the foreseeable future. But we see a different trend happening during the pandemic. Look at these apps like OnlyFans, like Patreon, like Substack. We have found that people are willing to pay their favorite creators for exclusive content. And I think Twitter gets that. I don't know that people are going to subscribe just to be a part of Twitter, but they will pay to make sure that their favorite creators can continue to make content for them. And so that's why you're seeing Twitter lean into possible subscriptions around writers and journalism. They just acquired a newsletter platform, and they're also reportedly testing features where people can directly pay Twitter users for other types of content, whether it's commerce and things that they're selling, or unique writing and journalism again. So I think that Twitter, it really just depends on what it is they're going to be charging people for and whether or not they can execute in a way that actually gets those monetizable daily users, to your point, interested in paying.
Monetizable is the key word here. Before we let you go, the big difference between Twitter and Facebook, Instagram, to me, is this idea that I've actually transacted on Facebook and Instagram. It's driven purchase decisions for me. Does Twitter need to look at some of that, the e-commerce and digital payment side of things, to help kind of drive engagement?
Yes, Twitter, in my opinion, needs to focus on core ad product. When you talk to marketers, Dom, they'll tell you the reason we pour our money into Google and Facebook is because we see return on investment. We know our ads get people to buy things. One, Twitter needs to focus on making sure its ad product actually is compelling enough to get people to buy things. And two, Twitter has no efforts, to your point, to introduce commerce to the platform. As we are in this pandemic, more and more people are buying things online. If Twitter doesn't start to think about it, it's a missed opportunity.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.